Yeah, so good evening, everyone. Those who it's afternoon, good afternoon, because some of our members are also from other African countries. So welcome to today's session. And today it's part of the webinars that we do, webinars that are related to key thematic areas that some of the members are working on. So today we are meeting you, members, anyone who is working or has interest in working around the area of psychology, mental health. This is a place, or even just generally, you're interested in the topic, you're very welcome. My name is Aurelia Monene. I know most of you. And today we have such an honor to have a great mind, a great researcher. He's smiling, wondering who I'm talking about. A great mind and researcher. I met Patrick at the Africa, it was the Africa Evidence Summit. We were presenting our work there as ADA, and I met Patrick there. He works with Busara. He will tell us a bit about himself. And he was very interested in the work we do. And so we got talking, and that's how Patrick is here. So today he's going to share his journey as a researcher in psychology. I know most of you are impressed, like I was. How is a professor looking so young? We are used to professors who have aged and aged along the years. So it's also nice to listen to his journey. And I think when people share their journeys, it gives us an opportunity to see ourselves through their journey, to also pick up some lessons, some things that we can also pick as discussion points. So we are also welcoming you to share any questions that you have around researching on mental health and psychology. I think Patrick is ready for that as well. Any question that currently, as you work through your paper, you're kind of struggling with, I think it should also be a good opportunity. So I just want to welcome you all. Patrick read his profile, but because he sent us his profile, but because he's sharing his journey, let me not read his profile so that he can take us through how his journey has been. And please feel free to introduce yourself on chat so that we know who is here. And I welcome you, Patrick. Do you need me to make you a co-host if you want to share something?
I think I'll just talk through
Okay.
a little bit of my journey. Thanks, Aurelia. With that introduction, you hyped me up so much. I hope I can live up to it. Great mind. I hope so. Hi, everybody. It's really nice to meet you. Yeah, as Aurelia said, my name is Patrick, and I'm currently a director at Busara. Which is focuses on behavioral science, which I think is pretty strongly related to psychology, if not includes psychology in some ways. So Busara is a nonprofit in Nairobi that does lab-based research, but also lab in the field research, some field experiments, all related to behavioral science. And all of our work is in some way related to development and different aspects of development. But my background, as Aurelia was saying, is in psychology. I got my PhD in psychology in the United States at it's called the University of Wisconsin. And very briefly, I was a professor. I don't have that title anymore, but I don't know, once a professor, always a professor, or I'm not sure. But I do have some experience with that. I worked, again, in the United States at the University of Wisconsin for about 2 years. And mostly my work focused on research methods and social psychology. I have many friends who do clinical psychology, and I can speak a little bit to that, mostly in the US context. But the reason I got to Busara is the reason that I became not a professor anymore, and sort of took a sideways turn in my career journey. And that's when I became interested in research improvement. So basically using principles from psychology and behavioral science to improve how research is used and in the way it happens. And as part of that, I was working to fund a nonprofit that does very large psychology projects where we have collaborators from all over the world, including Africa and outside of Africa. I also started working with a PhD student named Adeyemi Adetulla, who's originally from Nigeria and is interested in using the same concept of very large collaborative research projects focused on Africa. And I still work with him. He goes back and forth between France and Nigeria. And from there, I saw a job ad for Busara, and I already had this interest in, taking some of these learnings about research improvement and using them in applied behavioral science. And so I applied for a job, and here I am. I'm a director at Busara. So you can see it's sort of a sideways journey. So as far as things that I could talk about, of course, I can talk about at least my experience with the research process and, skills that have been useful for me. We could talk about concrete projects that you're working on. If you have questions about, for example, what it was like to be, what it's like at Busara, what it was like to be a professor for the brief period that I was a professor, or there's a special topic that is kind of close to my heart that we could talk as much or as little as you want, but one of the reasons I became interested in the improvement of research has to do with this thing called the replication crisis that has affected research in psychology. Basically, there are quite a few findings in psychology that don't seem quite as solid as we once thought. So that's a whole set of topics that I could go on and on about, but I don't want to. I want the discussion really to be led by your questions. So I'll call it there. And really, I'd love to see your questions, and I can expound upon whatever you think is appropriate and useful to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I think to start us off, members, please share your questions. This is the time. You can also share your research that you're doing, what kind of interesting stuff is coming up, any dilemmas that you're having. And it would be nice also, Patrick, to just mention one or two of those findings. You've called it something about ramification of research. I haven't caught the word.
Yeah, it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's called the replication crisis, and I'm happy to discuss that further. Basically, when I was in graduate school, there were a couple of events that made it clear that findings in psychology, and I think it applies outside of psychology too, are not as solid as we might have hoped. But part of what's come out of the replication crisis is some tools to figure out which findings are more solid and which findings are less solid. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that further if that would be interesting.
Okay, maybe that's something we can pack as if members are interested. So one of the questions that I've been receiving a lot, I'll just start off as everyone is getting ready. I'm just warming the place. One of the questions that a lot of members I've seen struggle with is the issue of aligning your research question with the research design that is appropriate. And maybe you can speak to that. How can one navigate that? Because as we see, if that is not well aligned, then your starting point is quite difficult.
Yeah, that's a good one. One of the complications with research design is that there are different reasons why a research design can be good. Basically, there are different dimensions of research quality. Chris, just to react to your comment about the replication crisis, actually, yes, I agree. It's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think it's a good thing because part of what's happened is we've learned a bit more about what makes for good research, which ties back to my my comment just now about how there are different reasons why research can be good. So one of the frameworks that I learned for how to think about research is it's called the validity framework. There are different types of research validity. There are many variations of this, but one type of validity is called internal validity. This is the ability from a research design to make causal inferences. So certain types of research designs allow you to say what causes what a little bit more than others. One of the very famous designs that is very strong for causal inference is the randomized controlled trial. And the idea, of course, behind the randomized controlled trial is that if you have, say, two conditions, and people are allocated randomly to the conditions, so they have an equal probability to get into each. That means that on average, in expectation, the groups are going to be about the same on all characteristics, except for the one that you choose or the ones that you choose. And this is very powerful because it's a way to eliminate what's called selection bias. This is powerful for the specific purpose of causal inference. Randomization is not a panacea, but it's really good for causal inference. But there are other dimensions of research that are also important and that you might want to maximize for a particular research question. So another very important one is called external validity. This is the ability to generalize to settings that you care about. So if you bring people into a lab, for example, Busara has this very large standing lab. That's one of the things that we're famous for. And labs are really good for maintaining control, and especially for doing randomization. So lab-based settings can be very nice for causal inference, but they're very bad for this thing called external validity, because the lab setting is quite different from the settings that you might care about. Maybe you want to draw conclusions about what's happening in schools. Well, the lab is different from schools. It's as simple as that. So different research designs are more or less appropriate for the types of quality that you want to maximize. It's really important to you to be able to speak to the school setting. Then maybe you want to do your research in schools and not in the lab, despite the fact that in the school setting, it might be hard to do randomization. So I find this framework of validities. There are 4 of them. There's external validity, internal validity, construct validity, and conclusion validity. I find this very useful to help me think about what would be important for the question that I'm trying to answer right now. Depending on the nature of that question and which types of conclusions are most important to me, I might choose to get a little bit more of one type of validity and trade off a little bit of another type of validity because it's important, but just not so important right now. So that's one idea that I think is really useful to think about for aligning questions with designs. Think about the types of research quality, the types of things that are important to you right now, and try to maximize those things that are important to you right now, and maybe accept the fact that your research is not going to be perfect on all dimensions, because no research can be.
Thank you very much. The floor is open, members. Do you have any follow-up question? Are you currently struggling with that connection in your study? So Patrick, you said external, internal, construct, and
conclusion. So construct validity is about measurement and how well your measures capture the things that you're actually interested in. Measurement is so fundamental and often neglected. And doing measurement well can be quite hard. So construct validity, I think that's super important. And then conclusion validity is your ability to be certain about the conclusions that you draw. And usually this is about how many observations you have, how many participants in psychology research, how many times each participant is observed. There are certain types of research designs that can give you more conclusion validity and certain types that give you less. This is just about how strongly you can draw your conclusions.
Absolutely. Thank you. And if you have a reference that you could share that people could go check, feel free now or later. Okay. So I've seen one question. Please, you can always unmute and just ask a question. Guru, would you like to just ask your question instead of me reading, if you can? Okay, maybe I can read it for you. Could be in a noisy place. How do you see AI affecting the field of psychology in the coming years? As scholars, how should we integrate this, this without diluting or compromising research?
Yeah, that's a good one. The short answer is I don't know. And I don't think anybody else really does. And if anybody says otherwise, probably if you probed them, they would be a little bit less certain than they said initially. The longer answer is, it seems like there are many areas in which AI could have an influence. I think there are some areas where it already has, at least in the form of machine learning. It sounds a little bit less fancy than AI, but that's been happening for a long time. And machine learning, in some ways, it's just like a lot of the same statistical tools that you might be learning about in your research methods classes, like regression, logistic regression, just dressed up in fancy clothes. So I think there's some hype going on in that there's some of the tools are familiar ones, but just dressed up in fancy clothes, as I was saying. Certainly with the large language models, they can do more than I was familiar with before, and that's where my uncertainty comes in. I'm a little bit cautious about, I feel a little bit cautious about the fact that there's a lot of hype going on and no one really knows what these tools are going to be, how they're going to end up. I've tried a little bit of using large language models to help with writing, and I found them to be not so useful to me because they make a lot of mistakes. They get the details wrong, and that's so important for research. One area where they might be useful, which is a little bit specific to psychology, is in analyzing, putting numbers onto text, analyzing them for very specific types of content, like sentiment analysis. I've seen a couple of papers saying that they can do this quite quickly and efficiently. I don't know how well that works, but that is a use that makes sense to me because these are large language models, and that involves assigning numbers to text, and so it makes sense to me that this is something that sort of comes out of the box with these tools that could be quite useful. I had tried previously, many years ago, using some early versions of these tools to analyze text, and I thought they worked pretty terribly, but maybe the new ones work better. So I think that's one place that they could be useful. Another place is if any of you make questionnaires, for example, surveys, sometimes you need many different survey questions that get at a similar theme, and it can be very time consuming to generate those. So I've heard, I can't verify this use myself because, as I said, I found these tools to be of limited usefulness so far, but I've heard that perhaps these could be useful for generating those different variations of questions. That also maybe makes sense to me, but again, I'd be personally cautious. So that's a long-winded way of saying, there's some potential, but I don't really know for sure, and I don't think anybody does.
Well put. So the floor is open now. Anyone wants to speak about their research or a question they have? Let me keep quiet. And thank you for sharing the link to the validities. Millie,
okay.
Chris?
Okay, hi, how are you? Thanks, Patrick, for the presentation, and I was not being moralistic when I'm talking about replication crisis being a bad thing, not bad versus good. It's just that and when I say a fledgling, I hope I can be heard clearly. When I say a fledgling researcher, it's just I've just completed my MA, and I was doing a qualitative study that I had to fight for. And what even pulled me to this kind of research, even before, because once taught qualitative and that kind of thing, was I wanted to get accounts, phenomenological accounts of my respondents, but I was not interested in generalizing. So maybe in there, but maybe the question, how much of, and I love what you said about being, the social psychology, because again, that's where I feel pulled to, but how much of social psychology is an art rather than a science, or even psychology generally? And even where is a place for a qualitative study, research, sorting out, being an antidote to the replication crisis? Thanks.
Yeah, Chris, that's such a keen question. And it points to a longstanding tension in psychology, that between the more humanities orientation to psychology and the more quantitative approach to psychology. I think one of the reasons for the replication crisis is that, at least in the United States, and this hasn't been true across all countries, but in the United States, psychology felt this need to justify itself to the harder sciences and to present itself as being very, very scientific. And that led to a heavy emphasis on quantitative methods. In social psychology, a heavy emphasis on experiments. And I do personally think that there's a role, maybe even a strong one, for experiments and the quantitative approach in psychology, but it is not the be all and end all. And I also think that it is a big mistake for anyone to dress up their results as if they're more certain than they can actually be. And that I think is one big reason for the replication crisis, is that many researchers tried to dress up their results in exactly that way, as if they were stronger than they could be. So where I think qualitative approaches can be really useful is adding that richness to people's lives that quantitative approaches just can't capture, and having that detail and holism. I think that's incredibly useful and even necessary. In Busara, even though this was not my original training, I was trained as a really pretty hard quantitative research psychologist. But Busara relies quite heavily on qualitative approaches and tries to integrate those two approaches with varying levels of success. Sometimes we do a good job and sometimes we do a bad job. But I think those qualitative approaches are so important for getting a good sense of the context in a particular place. And especially if you want to use research to, do good, to improve things, having a good sense of context is absolutely critical. So personally, I hope, and I see these approaches as informing each other. The quantitative approach, some things that it can do that the qualitative approach is not so good at is allowing for a little bit stronger of causal inference, and also a little bit stronger of generalization if you do it well. Also, it can estimate particular quantities very well because it's quantifying things. Yeah. So I hope that these two approaches can complement each other. But historically, at least in the psychology that I'm familiar with, they've often fought with each other, and I hope that's a thing that can change.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, perhaps you could also share maybe okay, I'll look for it, the website for Busara, just to see what it is what more that you do. In January, I'll be out of school.
Okay. Yeah. So it's I'll give you the website.
Okay.
We're at our office is at Applecross in Lavington.
Okay.
And here's our website.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for highlighting that tension, which I hope our universities become more accepting of both methods and especially creating room for qualitative methods, because that has been the struggle. Yeah, and to students have really been frustrated. Bernice, I see your mic is on, off. You want to speak? Please go ahead.
Yes, I do. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Hi, Patrick. My name is Bernice. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I just completed my dissertation. Actually, I think you know one of my supervisors, Dana Basnight-Brown. So I actually thought it would be, I don't really particularly have a question, although I think I do. But my question is geared more towards everybody who's present, because when I saw this on the WhatsApp group, I thought it would be great to see who would like to do collaborations in terms of like research, because I am postdoctoral. So I'm looking to kind of grow my research skills a little bit more. I'm looking to collaborate even in just publishing from some of the data set that I have. And so I thought this would also be a good forum to kind of pose that question. But if I was to pose a question to you directly, Patrick, is actually how do you start to grow your research journey as a researcher? Because I'm a highly trained clinician, but then also trained a little bit in research just because of the kind of degree I did. And I'm just like, I don't know, like, where do people start with this kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Bernice. And yeah, I know, or Bernice, sorry. And yeah, I know Dana very well. I talk with her quite often. So it's really nice to meet you. And please say hello to Dana for me.
Yep, I will.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the short answer again is it's hard. I I don't like to pretend that things are easy when they're not. But the advice that I got when I was getting my research training was to draw your inspiration from the world rather than from the research literature. Yes, of course, sometimes the research literature can give you a sense of what the landscape is. But research, I think, is when it's done best, it's supposed to be useful. I'm showing a little bit maybe my orientation and why I'm at a place like Busara that's focused on applied research. But I think the tools that we learn about how to find things out, those are tools that can and should be used to improve the world and to like generate more knowledge to like help frame the problems that we see. So if you have something, that a problem or a topic that you want to know more about, just independent of what the research says, I think that's the starting place.
Sure.
Now that being said, the whole point of research as well is there are many people out there that are thinking about the same things, and often they have smart things to say. And so I think the reading about what other people have done can help frame your ideas a little bit more clearly, or give you a different set of tools to understand the same problems that you've been thinking about already. But I see some research that's a little bit more like it's like research for research's sake. It doesn't really have a problem behind it. It's just people trying to meet their degree requirements for programs that have requirements around publishing, and that's a very dissatisfying way of doing research, I feel. And you get more of a reason for it if you're a bit more problem driven.
Sure.
The other bit of advice that I'd have is, or that's helped me, I think one of the best things that I did in graduate school is work with a variety of other budding researchers. So I think your call to for collaborators is well taken. And for me, I was at a conference and I met someone who was doing a project that turned out to be like almost the same as mine. And this could have gone one of two ways. We could have said, okay, someone else is competing with me. I better get my project out first. Or we could have joined forces and used our projects to improve each other. And
Right.
that's what's happened. We ended up working together. And I think that's one of the best projects I've ever done. And it also exposed me to, there's no one like a smart collaborator who has different thoughts than you to like push you a little bit and help you understand where your limitations are. And that's exactly what's happened to me. So I do think those collaborations can be really instrumental in developing research interests and to push you forward. And I dropped a link in the chat to one, this is actually the nonprofit that I was working to fund before I joined Busara. It's called the Psychological Science Accelerator, and it's designed to facilitate very large collaborations, very large international collaborations. And to give you a sense of just how big these projects are, maybe Dana has talked about this, I don't know, but for everybody else, for everybody else, our biggest project had about 450 collaborators on the final paper. So when I say big, I mean huge sometimes. But it's nice not just for those specific projects, but also as a community to get to know other people. I've met so many collaborators through the Psychological Science Accelerator, including Dana. I think I see a few more initiatives like this of like online communities that have sprung up to do collaborative projects. Another one is called Fort, which I'll also drop in the chat. These did not exist when I was first starting my PhD, but I think are a really useful tool for developing that network and meeting new people with similar interests and also, getting your name out there a bit.
Yeah, thank you for that. Definitely, like I'm just actually checking out the links, and it looks like these are really good pointers. I think one of the challenges that comes also with collaboration is where you're not too confident about your skill level. So you feel like, there's still some learning that needs to happen or some more mentorship or something like that as well. And I guess both can happen simultaneously. I guess when you collaborate, you can also learn from your colleagues or whatever. Yeah.
I hear you. I don't know if you or other people in the room are familiar with this term, imposter syndrome. So yeah, you sort of feel like you don't belong, or like your skills just don't measure up to other people's. And the truth is that everybody has that feeling, especially in highly technical and skill intensive fields. I've had imposter syndrome. Everybody else has. I still have it sometimes. When I joined Busara, there are skills that I did not have that I had to develop. I had the research skills because I was fortunate enough to have very strong PhD training, I think. But I did not have any management skills at all. I also didn't have leadership skills. I had never managed a budget before because I hadn't had to. So those are skills that I had to develop, and everybody is at different places in their learning journey. So the truth is that the learning will not stop, especially if you're continuing on in research. The whole point is to add to people's collective knowledge and to keep developing our collective knowledge and develop the skills necessary to do that. So do not feel like you don't measure up, because nobody measures up. The standards are too high and we're all learning together.
All right. Thank you for that. Thanks for the encouragement, Patrick. I also just wanted to mention, as I close up and maybe give someone else a chance, my research interests are in suicidal thoughts and behaviors. suicide prevention, adolescent mental health, and brain behavior relationships. So in case, any of us, has done research in that area or would like to collaborate on something, I'm open to that. Thank you.
Bernice, I have a colleague who I know through the Psychological Science Accelerator, who he's Indonesian, but he's very connected to some of the international suicide initiatives, anti-suicide initiatives. His name is Sandy Oni.
Sure.
He might be someone to look up.
Yeah. Do you mind posting his name or?
Yeah, I just dropped a link in the chat to his profile.
Oh, the black dog. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
Great insights there. Thank you, Bernice. And just a quick follow-up question on that. Patrick, you have been in the through Busara's work, immersed yourself in the research ecosystem, maybe for psychology in Kenya. What opportunities are you seeing for young researchers who are looking to improve their research skills, even to collaborate? How is our ecosystem here? Just in case you have interacted with more researchers who are not doing school or academic research, they're now applied research. What are you seeing? Is there collaboration? Is the ecosystem growing? Do we have many actors actually doing research for research that has meaning, that is improving lives, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, so my observation, and I do not claim to have the final word on this. I'm just telling you my impression, is that in Kenya, the research ecosystem for psychology is very overlapping with the research ecosystem for behavioral science and behavioral economics. So the term that I know better is behavioral science, but that is psychology. It's not so much clinical psychology, or at least I haven't seen that as strongly. But it could be, and I feel like I'm using all of the same skills that I was using when I was in the United States doing mainline social psychology research. So behavioral science is pretty hot. It's especially hot in the development sector, which is, one of the sectors that Busara is in. So, for example, the United Nations has some initiatives to push behavioral science in their work. And that means there's some money coming into behavioral science. So that's the term that I've seen most strongly. It hasn't been psychology, which is something that surprised me a little bit. That being said, that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for psychology as well, but I've just observed that behavioral science, behavioral economics, this like general space is pretty hot, and there's some demand for it, especially in the development sector.
Thank you. The floor is open. Members, feel free to ask any question. Do I see any mic open? Not yet. We have some time, so don't feel pressure for time. We have some time till 7. So if there's something you're struggling with, or just anything that is unclear, sometimes it's not even a struggle. It's more in the unclear realm. Feel free to just type. You can type if you can't speak, or you can just unmute.
There's a popular phrasing in Kenya, they say the ground is literally different. I mean, on the ground, things are different. Now, the question would be, would you share perhaps a tangible difference that in the research that you've done that has, a tangible difference that has made in somebody's or a group of people's everyday lives? because of the research you did? Maybe you could just share a story about that.
Yeah, sure. So some of our work in Busara right now is to improve the experiences of our research participants. So I think the development sector does not necessarily have a good track record in centering the concerns of participants and even of like making their work relevant to participants. But something that we've been working on is to in Busara is to align our projects more closely with the desires of participants and to make sure that we're treating them with respect when they enter our projects, because really they're supposed to be our partners and not something people that we're doing things to. So for example, we did just some basic interviews to learn about times that they felt that they had been treated well and times that they felt like they had been treated not well. We've done some experiments with our consent forms to make them more understandable. We've done some experiments with returning the results of our projects to participants to try to ensure that the learnings in some way feed back to their communities. And for me, this initiative is really meaningful. I'm not the primary driver of this. Instead, that's my colleague on my team, Joel Wambua. He started as a field officer, actually, and is now a researcher in his own right, trying to make our projects better for participants. So that's a line of work that I take a lot of pride in. And it's we've learned some of the things that we haven't been doing so well. For example, a lot of our participants, aren't necessarily clear on what research is. It's, of course, they wouldn't be because, maybe this is the first time they've ever interacted with a research organization, right? So sometimes they think, we're here to give them classes or we're here to give out aid. And that's on us to clarify what it is that we're doing and how what we're doing could or could not benefit their communities. And that's forced us to be a little bit more intentional about how we introduce ourselves and how we onboard our participants to our work. But as I said, I think this whole agenda, to me, it's very meaningful, and it has potential both to improve our own operations in Busara, but insofar as other organizations see what we're doing and think, oh, that's a good idea, maybe it has the potential to affect them too.
Oh, okay. So, but that's to the research participants. But maybe the question would be, what do you do with your results? I mean, what is it that you're okay? Rather than what do you do with them? Okay, let me just say, maybe give share what my interests are. For instance, my research was about the lived experiences of recovering alcoholics regarding their family dynamics. And that's because of my work as an addictions interventionist. Family members are the ones who call me. And before, and the phone call would be, give me the number of a cheap rehab. And I would do that. But nothing would change, because they'll get the number, they'll go there, and then they'll come and tell me, Chris, it didn't work. So now I wanted to find out from the recovering alcoholics, what's the story around your family dynamics, and I don't know what difference it made except for them to share, like now you're talking about the difference it makes to the research participants. For them, the difference was nobody has asked them this kind of, all the 4 people I used, they said nobody has asked them in that context. So I don't know what difference it has made in their lives in Kenya. But that's why I'm asking, what's the point of this?
Well, I think that's
publishing and graduating.
I mean, it's a fair question, and I think it's a good one to keep asking. One idea I might have is you could see whether sharing some of those stories back to other people who are recovering makes a difference in whether they feel like whether the recovering alcoholics feel like they're lonely, or maybe they feel less lonely, or maybe the journey feels more achievable. Of course, like it can be hard to figure out, okay, now that I have this like very narrow piece of knowledge, what do I do with it? But if you observed in your own work while you're doing this, like people felt, maybe this is doable. Maybe that's a learning that you could pick up and run with. Maybe that's something that would help other people too, and that in turn could help other addiction specialists. Maybe that's a technique that they could use to help their clients feel less alone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. In line with that, Patrick, I don't know what you think about, because I find like many students, I included, I'm also doing a paper. People do really amazing work. They invest a lot in it, but the channels of even communicating what that was about are very few. Like I would say, like in the consultancy world, we usually have what we call validation of findings, where we'd call people even beyond the research, and they'll just talk about what was the research, and they'll generate a conversation. How valuable is it for us who are working on academic research to also have a practice where we can speak? Of course, there are costs, a bit of cost, a practice where we can speak about our research to wider people, so that they're not just left in the shelves and no one really cares about them. I've seen one hand from Anne Massey. Maybe you can shelf that. Anne Massey, you can ask. Then Patrick, you can answer that one later.
Yeah, I think as Chris was asking, because I'm also, the moment I just joined in, I keep wondering, and even as Bernice was talking, it's like, why would this?
Oh, and Mercy, I think you're on mute now.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. So there was some interruptions. Yeah. So as Bernice even was talking, I kept wondering, why would anyone want to do a research other than to be a professor? And I think that's where the question Chris was supposed to go, because most people who go into research, I keep wondering, what would be the motive? What is the motivation to do? Because, okay, now I have done my research, is my research paper, and then what? You see, as a clinician, there's always, you feel there's tangible results. After a session, you feel, oh my God, there's that, maybe a bit selfish, but is that after the session, I feel good I've helped someone, I feel good I've listened to someone, but so that's tangible. So, yeah.
And Mercy, I hear you. And I'm someone who, left my position as a professor to do something that I felt was more useful. So I do think that there's a danger of, doing research for research's sake. The hope is, of course, that what research does is it builds an evidence base that you can then take back and use to inform and make better interventions or other sorts of products, because you know what works. But, of course, I've met many people who are just like trying to put out papers, and that's what they're doing. And I'm saying like, well, okay, that's nice, but then what? So to go back to that idea of like having other ways of communication, could be like op-eds, or in the nonprofit world, we have white papers, or I've also done some writing for some like trade magazines. And for me, that's been very gratifying, and perhaps a way to share these learnings with other audiences who might pick them up and use them for other purposes. But of course, it's a little bit easier said than done. And one of the reasons I left my position as a professor is that I felt like there was a bit too much pressure to just write papers for the sake of writing papers. And that's not something that I wanted. So I went off and did something else. And that's worked for me. I still feel like I'm very much connected to the research world, but I do many other things that, for me, give me some satisfaction and feel a little bit more useful to me. So I want to acknowledge that this is a real danger, and it's a tension that I have felt as well. But I do believe in the power of research for gathering evidence that can be useful in its own right, like this idea of making or helping recovering alcoholics to feel like they're less alone. That's an idea that I think you could get without doing some deep qualitative research, but certainly like seeing that experience and hearing that people reflect that back to you over and over again, that's quite useful for shifting that direction. But it does require asking that question, well, so what? So I think that question is very, very useful, and it's good practice to go back and ask that of yourself every now and again.
Thank you for that. I think I have attended a few evidence summits and conferences, and the thing I keep hearing is that in Africa we don't have a lot of evidence in some of the very, very crucial things. And then on the other side, we have researchers who are doing research and asking, so what will this? So I think there's also a divide between those who need to use evidence and those who are producing evidence. There seems to be a conversation they're not having, because like your research, Chris, trust me, also practitioners or scholars who are studying addiction, probably they are looking for this type of evidence to enhance their work, but that communication between and there is no clear line of producer and user. Sometimes I think you can be both, but those who are actively using are also looking for those who are actively producing. So I think that's the kind of connections we can also maybe plug into. Is one of the things we were saying, that if you're studying in a particular field of your research, try and find communities that are working on that. It could be policymakers. Right now, you could be hearing a policymaker say, and I've heard them say, we don't have data on addiction, on how to improve rehab. And Chris has the work, is ready, and can share some of it. So I think plugging into where the conversation, your research is taking place, I think would be important, because I've had that narrative a lot. People are looking for evidence, researchers are looking for relevance of their work. Yeah, that's what I would add for that. I don't know what you'd say, Patrick. I've seen you shaking your head.
Yeah. I mean, Aurelia, that's such a keen point. I definitely agree. I think part of the problem is that, of course, papers are written for other researchers, and they're not useful to policymakers most of the time because they're not written in the right way. And but at the same time, I think the users of evidence, they don't necessarily get all the nuances of when you can conclude one thing versus another, and why what research methods are suited for drawing one conclusion versus another. That's the domain of researchers. So there's this problem on both sides. And I think there's quite a bit of refining that has to happen to turn many types of research into the kinds of things that are useful to the end users of evidence. Maybe an exception would be like if you talk to a bunch of recovering alcoholics and they've told you, this is the first time that someone has asked me about my journey. Like that seems pretty relevant, I think. But there's a lot of types of research that I think are not of this kind. So like sometimes I've found that in order to, like, I might write a paper, right? But then the thing that actually is useful to the end users is maybe like I'm talking to someone in a conversation about that project, or I've written, maybe a short op-ed or something for a trade magazine. And that's the thing that ends up being more useful. Or maybe, someone else ends up doing that better than I could because they have skills that I don't. So I do think there's like sort of this pipeline and that refines the evidence into the form that is most useful. And I think, I'm at Busara, so I feel some of that responsibility to do that refinement. But whoever's doing it, it does need to happen in order to have that real relevance. And it takes some time.
Yeah, and when you said about writing for researchers, I've been thinking, and many of my classmates, and some of them are here, we've been thinking about writing about our research writing process, our thesis writing process. And if anything, maybe to heal and to deal with the imposter syndrome, and but also maybe for improvement by the ones who are running the show next when we are gone, or or even to see how it would be for me to be a supervisor in future. But I'm wondering whether that's valid, to write about the thesis process itself rather than what we were researching, or is there nothing that's unresearchable?
Yeah, why not? One of the things that was very popular, I think it's still popular, but it was growing in popularity when I was getting my training, was academic blogs, or just like personal journals online. I read quite a lot of them when I was getting my training. And platforms like, I mentioned the Psychological Science Accelerator has this online community, but Twitter, while Twitter was still like not crazy, it used to be used by academics a lot. I think people are exiting it a little bit. But in general, social media, I think, has filled some of that role of like allowing people to talk about other things rather than just like the strict research, But to your original question, I think a lot of people would get value out of that, out of like reading your reflections. Or even, this community right here, this is a place to do that sharing too. It's all valid. And like, just because it's not strictly research in that very narrow definition does not mean that does not diminish its value. The value comes from the people who receive the message and say, oh, that's really useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that would be so useful, and especially because there are so many varied experiences that many people have around how they developed their research journeys. And I think it will be such a great read, especially from Africa, because people are looking for these experiences from people who have schooled in African universities, and it would really, really be amazing. I always say the research journey is fine. There is a product of the research, but there is who you become. There is who you learn about yourself throughout that journey that is great to share. So we have just come to the top of the time, but okay, Patrick, you have a blog. Great. It would be nice to read through it. You can talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I use this as like just an outlet. When I was a PhD student, I haven't been so active on it recently. But I got a lot of value out of, I just wrote about whatever was interesting to me. And you'll see that I linked to a couple other blogs that I followed while I was in graduate school. Now I see some people use Medium or Substack, or I'm also on LinkedIn. LinkedIn isn't so great for like personal sharing because it's so oriented towards professionals. But anyway, maybe some of you would find value out of some of these outlets. And I can assure you, at least when I was doing my blog, like not a ton of people read my blog, but some did. And I got emails from people, and I think some people got some value out of things that I wrote. So again, why not? The value comes from the people who read it and tell you, oh, this was nice.
Absolutely. Is there anyone with a burning question before, Patrick, you give us your final shot? Anyone with something you'd like to ask? Or and if you have any question after this that comes up, please feel free to, I think, Patrick, you're open to answering if someone has a question, right? Or you've shared your email?
Yes, 100%. So Actually, I mean, this was a ton of fun. And I'm so glad that you asked so many questions. And please, if you do have more questions, that's my email at Busara. Do use it and ask. I may not get back to you right away, but I will get back to you. I promise. Most of all, thanks for welcoming me and for being so engaged. And this was really a lot of fun.
Thank you for honoring our invitation and really speaking to things that have really inspired us, given us insights into things we hadn't thought about, or even reinforced some of what we had known before. So thank you also, members, for making time to be here. The recording will be available. We will share it. And feel free to reach out to Patrick. He's so responsive. I have seen it in practice, so he will get back to you. And I just want to wish you a good evening. I'll hang around for 2-3 minutes in case you need to pick anything from the chat, a link, the email. So I'll just be here for 2-3 minutes, and I wish you a good evening. Sorry, I wish you a good evening, and thank you so much, Patrick, for being here.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your generosity. That was awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks
Thank
again
you
for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aurelia.
Always. Let me copy the chat in case anyone is not able to. Patrick, you shared such good links. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Yeah, glad to do it.
We are so grateful. So, okay.
Okay, have a good one. Have a great weekend all.
Okay, okay. Please
Great to meet
copy
you,
all.
Chris.
Huh?
Oh, great to meet you, Chris.
Yeah, we have our graduation in a couple of weeks. So
happy for you.
oh, the journey. Aurelia has been a partner in, not even more than a mentor.
So we're
That's wonderful.
battling
Oh,
together.
I'd have gone crazy. So she broke it down and she said, just come and talk. Because I didn't know epistemology, entomology, I don't know all those things. And I have a
mean,
document now.
we all need partners on this journey, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's tough.
Mm. And then, you know, it feels, even that partnership feels counterintuitive in an increasingly individualistic world, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So that, you know, you're just asking, when you're asking for help, is it, what if you take my ideas from me, you know, that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, the journal club was so useful.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And I know what you're. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying glad it was. Yes, go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I have felt those same tensions. So it's not just you. You know, I mentioned that story about that person who we ended up working together, but you know, what I didn't tell you was that it took some time for us to both get to that place where it's like, no, we don't have to be, you know, antagonists. We can be helping each other. Because that competitive environment, you know, it's real. But we don't have to be competitors, and we can be helping each other and getting to the same place.
Yeah.
Great. Onwards, forward. Forward, onwards. I don't know how it goes.
Onward and upward.
Okay, so gentlemen and Lillian, I wish you a good evening and see you the next round. Take care.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, Patrick again.